Our next speakers are Dan Stein, who is a criminal lawyer who teaches mindfulness in his spare time, and Courtney Wilson, who's a lawyer and also an author. They have both contributed to The Right Not to Remain Silent, which if you haven't read it, I highly recommend that everyone here reads it. It's appropriate that we're doing this session right after Dan put us all in heightened states of anxiety, because talking about mental health is extremely important in this profession. Both Dan and Courtney have shown an incredible amount of courage by sharing their own mental health journeys in their book, The Right Not to Remain Silent, and they should be applauded for their efforts. Dan and Courtney. So we're going to start with some brief introductions from our panelists, and then in keeping with our theme of interaction, we're going to be taking questions and other people's stories from the audience. So I will let you guys start, and I will be in the audience to take questions.
All right. Do you mind if I ask you to move that laptop, if that's okay? Thanks.
I don't know if we can. I won't close it. I think it's gonna fall. I'm gonna let you take the heat for that.
Is that okay? All right. If I can leave this. Yes, good. Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. It's very nice to be here. Of the two, I'm Dan, and I want to thank you and thank the Federation of Ontario Law Associations for inviting Courtney and I, and for kind of plugging the book. Breaking the Stigma, Mental Health, Wellness, and the Practice of Law is the subject of both the book and our talk today. And I want to begin my remarks by asking you if you'd like to, or inviting you to join me in a mindfulness exercise. So if you're sitting, and most of you are, I just ask you to consider moving a little bit ahead of the back of your chair, so you're kind of supporting yourself. And if you're standing like I am, you can just stand with your legs about 1 foot apart, and you can rest your hands either if you're sitting on your lap or just let them hang on the side. And I'm going to ask in terms of your gaze, although you may be looking at me, you don't have to look at me. It might be better if you can just kind of lower your gaze for a moment and let it kind of rest a little bit in front of you. And like I'm going to do. And start by turning your attention to the top of your head, your scalp, and just kind of notice whatever sensations are there. There may not be much, but you will notice that whatever's present is present. And then turn your awareness towards your face, and your eyes, and your cheeks. Notice what that feels like. And then turn your awareness down towards your neck and your shoulders. And again, just letting whatever rises just be. And then continuing that journey down your shoulders towards your elbows and your arms and your hands. Just noticing whatever's present once more. Feeling of the air on your skin. And then turning your awareness towards your chest and the front of your body, and letting it kind of, your awareness, your attention, kind of scan down towards your stomach and your waist. Notice how your body just kind of supports itself. And turning your awareness back towards the back of your upper back, and letting it again drop down towards the middle of your back and towards your waist. And then continuing the journey from your waist down your legs and your knees and your shins and your calves and your feet. And then noticing your entire body, just kind of sitting, however it feels, or standing. And then continuing by being aware of the fact that you're physically somewhere, you're in a space, you're in a room, in a city, knowing that intellectually, and the fact that there's this sense of being somewhere, Hamilton, here in this city, in this room. And how as it flows out into the world. And also being aware of your visual sensations and your auditory sensations, the sounds in the room, the sounds of my voice, and just whatever visual sensations you're seeing. And then finally, being aware of that sense of maybe needing or wanting to do something, maybe something else. That sense of agenda, that sense of I need to do stuff. The I need to do something, whatever that means, if it's present or not. And then that kind of brings us full circle towards everything that, kind of categories of everything that we are aware of in this present moment. And whatever fills up your awareness, just let it be. You might lose the thread. Just sit here in that kind of all that awareness of the present moment. And then I'll ask you to turn your attention back towards me, and I'm appreciative of that, of you joining in that little mindfulness exercise. And so my talk is about resilience and building mental health strategies as lawyers and as people in the face of inevitable and specific challenges that we face as counsel. And to do so, I'm going to suggest that there are three top factors or variables, categories of things that you might want to consider to help build your mental wellness strategies or portfolio. So the first I'm going to suggest that you do is to make a checklist of the risk factors for you, mental health-wise, specifically as a lawyer. And so what do I mean by that? Well, I'd make an analogy to, let's say, the physical risk factors if you were in another job. For example, is the air clean? Or is it toxic? Do you sit in a chair all day, or are you up on a scaffold? So what are the physical risk factors? Do you carry a weapon as part of your job, or do you need to take other health precautions because of the people you work with? So what precautions do you need to be safe and healthy? And I would suggest that the same applies to our work as lawyers. Because as lawyers, we are like coal miners, paramedics, or police officers. We work in an environment that is extremely challenging, or can be, to our mental health. And so some of the factors to consider, I'd say, are as follows. First of all, what are the problems that people come to us with? And usually they're biggest problems, existential problems. Are they going to jail? Are they going to lose their livelihood? Are they going to have a life worth living in terms of being with their family and their friends and their business partners? How often will they see their loved ones? Will they lose their money, their business, get cheated out of something? Will they get some kind of justice? In other words, what is the state of their physical liberty, their personal relationships, and their financial well-being? And this is the heart of what most legal problems are about. And we are responsible, or at least we feel we are responsible, for sorting these out and whatever outcome comes along. Secondly, consider the kind of people we are dealing with, the clients whose lives you've taken responsibility for. They could be a business person, a narcissist, a psychopath, or a career criminal. Or they could be all four. And what about our professional colleagues in our offices or on the other side of a legal matter, presiding in court, judges, co-counsel, associates, employees, bookkeepers, court staff, government workers, members of the CRA, outside professionals. There's quite an assortment here, and many of whom fall into the same or similar categories as our clients. And then apart from the specific problems, consider the stories we hear every day sometimes about our clients and witnesses. They all have their stories, their anxieties, their judgments and their expectations, their traumas that often bear right down on our shoulders. And what does this mean? This means that we work in a tough mental environment, one of the toughest. And my suggestion is you can't make choices about your health without knowing what you're faced with. You need to be mindful. And because this is, in a sense, one form of mindfulness exercise. You are responsible for your mental well-being. No one is going to take responsibility for it, even if you feel sometimes other people should or contribute. And therefore, you have to have a personal wellness strategy. And so this kind of accounting strategy will help you be aware of what is bearing down on you as a person to make smart choices. And we are all subject to being hit with mental illness, trauma, or stress. And by being aware of these unique personal, professional elements, we can make it easier to feel good if we pay attention to them. Secondly, on my mental health checklist is physical health. I suggest that we all have to pay attention to the state of our physical well-being, because it can be the number one factor that makes you feel mentally stressed out. And this means asking yourselves those tough questions like, what am I eating? Is it ultra-processed food or is it whole food? Does it come from a factory or from another source? What am I drinking? How much alcohol and caffeine am I consuming? What am I smoking? What am I consuming to seemingly alleviate my stress, because it may be doing the opposite? And this is another kind of mental wellness strategy. And also, don't want to forget, how am I sleeping? Am I exercising? Physical health and well-being includes all of these factors, elements that for lawyers sometimes feel like a luxury and only apply to other people. But I suggest they equally apply to us. And it may seem like an unwanted reminder to be pointing these factors out, but I'm going to take this opportunity to do so. This is our one chance to live a quality life. Being a lawyer means that we are contributing to the wellness of our society at large. We are essential. Shakespeare's plays, I forget which one, said first kill all the lawyers, because that's how you get a bad, unwell-run society. We perform an incredibly integral part of the communal and civic well-being of our society. We also deserve to be taken care of. And it should not come at the expense of our personal health. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with one mere step. It doesn't matter where you are on that journey. And then finally, the third variable that I ask you to consider is something that I tackle in my chapter in the book. What is your psychological wellness strategy? And I'm afraid that Twitter and TikTok or Netflix will just not do it for you. Just like you need an environmental, kind of professional checklist and a physical checklist, I suggest you could do with a wellness inventory as well. And my suggestion for you is to adopt a mental wellness strategy that works for you. And do it as often as you would a physical wellness strategy, every day or every other day. Now, it doesn't have to be some kind of cliche granola-like activity like I took you through this morning. You don't have to meditate. But there is something in mindfulness and meditation that is helpful when it comes to considering a mental wellness strategy. Not to mention psychotherapy, which I also recommend, and I spent 3 years in. Any of those things are great. But my suggestion of a mental wellness strategy is to do something that doesn't have a utilitarian value to it. Do something that doesn't earn you any money or have any material benefit. It can be playing guitar, gardening, or playing with a toddler. It can be something, and maybe it should be something, that seems almost pointless, because meditation is like that. And the reason I say that is that mindfulness and paying attention to your mind makes you aware that the mind is a little bit like a child. It does what it wants. And the more time you spend with it, the more time it appreciates. Just like a child, all it wants to do is spend time with you. It doesn't want to be used all the time. So you're sending a message to yourself when you do something pointless, when you take a break that doesn't materially benefit your job or your status, that spending time with yourself is time well spent. And so, and it also answers a question that sometimes lurks underneath stress and anxiety, which is, am I at ease with myself? Am I worthwhile being just with my time, with myself? And spending time with yourself that has no material value answers that question quite positively with a big yes. And that can increase your sense of connectedness to the world, and it can make you feel like you're part of something larger, and it can usher in a greater sense of ease. So that is something I suggest we can do every day, ultimately being, and it kind of can connect us with that sense of push and pull that comes with being a human being, that sense of turbulence, and can help us enjoy the turbulence in life and also the practice of law ultimately. So those are my top 3 tips. Be aware of the risk factors in being a lawyer, which are not few. Be physically well, treat yourself well, and try to come up with, if you can, a mental wellness strategy. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I apologize in advance for my nerves. I'm Courtney. And like Dan, I'm here to discuss an issue that's often hidden in plain sight in our profession, which is mental health. My journey has been challenging, especially for someone who struggled with an eating disorder while navigating the demands of law, school, and legal practice. So I'm going to share my personal experience with disordered eating, the barriers I encountered, and how our profession can make a tangible difference. So my goal is to be as open as possible, because if my story resonates with even one person who's struggling, then it's worth speaking on. I do apologize if I refer to my notes often, as it's still something that is extremely hard to talk about. So, my journey with disordered eating began in law school. Although I was quite academically successful, I felt that I wasn't being seen as a candidate in the recruitment process. I felt that I didn't fit into the image that I thought was required to succeed in the profession. And at that time, I weighed around 270 pounds. So I started to believe that my lack of success, whether right or not, was because I was being judged not only on my credentials, but because of my appearance. And this wasn't explicitly stated, but it was the message that I internalized, that I needed to be skinnier, prettier, to be more successful in this profession. So over time, I began restricting my food intake to control my weight. And those restrictive behaviors became more intense as I lost weight, and I started receiving inadvertent praise from colleagues and professors that validated the unhealthy behaviors that I had been adopting. Each compliment reinforced the idea that my appearance was somehow tied to my worth, and that was the point where I realized that I had anorexia. So there are 2 types. Restrictive, which is what I had at that point. But as my eating disorder progressed, it developed into a subtype called binge purge subtype due to the months of extreme caloric deficit that I had been subjecting myself to. This is marked by periods of loss of control and binge eating. And in an effort to cure those binge eating episodes, I would either excessively exercise or self-induced vomiting. So this cycle was incredibly damaging, both physically and mentally, and my academic performance faltered, but I continued to receive more and more praise for my weight loss. So my disorder in many ways became a coping mechanism, which was a way to assert control in an environment where I felt such an intense pressure to conform. So looking back, I understand that this experience wasn't truly about food or weight. It was in response to a deep-seated feeling of inadequacy, stress, and the need for acceptance, which I didn't feel when I weighed 270 pounds. And I share this part of my story because I know there are many other people suffering with mental health issues, including eating disorders, that may feel similar and suffer in silence. But why should we have to suffer in silence? Shouldn't our profession, which values justice and compassion, also extend it to those within its ranks? The systemic barriers within our profession demand change, and I truly believe that we can create an environment that is both high-achieving and compassionate, and one that doesn't just allow, but encourages its members to seek the help they need without facing any sort of shame or backlash or fear for their professional reputation. So for me, accessing treatment was far from simple or straightforward. I was terrified that I would be judged for my behaviors, that my weight loss would be seen as cheating, that my professional career would be affected. However, in early 2019, while I was still in law school, it became apparent that I did need professional help. I was referred to an in-person clinic that specialized in treating eating disorders, and the program required a significant commitment. It was 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for 12 weeks or 3 months. And despite being referred on an urgent basis in early 2019, I wasn't able to access that clinic until May of 2020. And then that was derailed by the onset of COVID-19, which caused that clinic to close. So during that time, the isolation of the pandemic, my condition continued to deteriorate, and it heightened many of my other mental health struggles, anxiety and depression, as I'm sure the isolation of the pandemic did for many. I'd like to stress that eating disorders are one of the most serious mental health illnesses. They have the highest mortality rate of any mental health condition, and left untreated, they can lead to severe health complications, including organ failure, hair loss, etc. And they also impact your psychological well-being to an extreme degree. So it's crucial that people with mental health illnesses that need specialized care receive timely access to them. And without that access, it can be extremely difficult for them to function as a human, let alone a lawyer. And the chances of recovery the chances of recovering are slim without professional help. And even if you think you've dealt with it yourself, you're likely just pushing down things and not actually dealing with the problem. So when I entered articling, my eating disorder quickly dominated every aspect of my life. I dropped down to about 132 pounds, which for my height, which is approaching 5'11", was extremely unhealthy. I would often faint. My hair was falling out. My muscles were atrophied. I was continually fatigued. My cognition was gone, and it was a very difficult time, but it felt like the disorder was able to control the fear of trying to find my place in a professional world as a young articling student. And during that time, I still couldn't access the specialized care that I needed through the public health system. I felt like I was drowning in the demands of being an articling student, and it made day-to-day functioning pretty much insurmountable. And eventually, I had to turn to private treatment, as my physical and mental condition couldn't really withstand any more the continued non-treatment of the disorder, nor could my loved ones watch me continue to wither away. So this private treatment costs around $800 a week, and I was only able to access it because of the financial support of my family, and I know that that is beyond the reach for many. And it's something that needs to change. There needs to be access to care for people who need it, especially if it can become a life or death situation. So it's very hard to even seek help in the first place because eating disorders thrive in silence. There's this sort of, I describe it as a powerful internal voice in my head that drives me to hide what my compulsive behaviors are. And it can be relentless, and it convinces me that sharing my pain or what I'm going through would limit the control of the eating disorder, expose my vulnerability, and sabotage my professional career. So as a result, it's incredibly hard to talk about or even seek help, especially when that help seems like it's always just out of reach. So to combat that, I think we should foster, obviously, a culture where speaking about mental health issues is not only normalized but encouraged, and we can promote programs that encourage discussions about, such as this, workshops on mental health, similar to initiatives seen in firms that embrace mental health first aid or psychological safety training. And associations like this can set precedents for a healthier, more understanding workplace culture. These initiatives can make a vital difference. It could have made a vital difference for me. And it can help a lot of people that are currently still suffering in silence. And I think we should also be advocating for access to specialized treatment and provide clear pathways for accessing that treatment. We can, or associations can, partner with mental health organizations to ensure that resources are accessible, such as confidential health hotlines, mental health coverage guidance, and a list of therapists who are familiar with the unique pressures of the legal profession, which I'm sure is already in place in many institutions. But this would provide direct access for people with eating disorders like myself to bridge the gap waiting for public wait times if people can't, afford the private treatment, which I suspect is for many. So for eating disorders, access to specialized care is essential throughout a person's life. They can't entirely be cured. Instead, I often describe it as a hold over me that resembles an echo that that gradually fades with effective treatment. However, relapses are common, and it's kind of part of the journey. Today, access to specialized care remains as limited as it was for me, as it was in 2019. So other than the examples I've given, I'm sure there are plenty more things that can be done, and I hope that together as a profession we can move towards shifting that paradigm. So as I conclude, I want everyone to remember that your story, you're not defined by your struggles, but how you rise for them. And for a long time, I thought that my eating disorder and my mental health challenges would define me. But it's in each of these open conversations that I have that I find it has less of control over me and who I think I am. And I've written about this part of my life and my contribution to the right not to remain silent. And it was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to put into words, but it has allowed me to reflect on how far I've come and even the fact that I'm able to stand before you and speak here today. And the message of that book in my chapter is one of hope and resilience. There's always a pathway forward. It's not easy and it's not quick, but it's possible. And as I wrap up today, I'd like to leave you with a passage from that chapter. It sums up not only my journey, but the broader experience of many who struggle with mental health challenges in high-pressure environments like law. So I hope these words can help shed a light on the complexities of living with an eating disorder, more so than what I've said here, and the strength it takes to break free from it. So my journey often resonates with the feeling of being trapped in a prison of my own creation, which is a symbol of the mental and emotional struggle many individuals with eating disorders face. There is a mistaken belief that we are in control and the disorder is a result of our choices. However, eating disorders are serious mental health issues that are far from simple. The feeling of being trapped comes from the cycle and obsession of our actions, the embarrassment and judgment tied to the disorder, and the difficulty of seeking or accepting help. In fields like law, which value perfection and appearance, the harmful consequences of our actions receive inadvertent praise, strengthening the misguided belief that the outcomes of our unhealthy behaviors justify the associated costs and ultimately reinforce the bars of that self-constructed prison. So thank you for listening and allowing me to share my story. I hope it inspires you to take care of yourself, to incorporate some of the strategies that Dan has given you, and to ask for help when you need it. And to remember that your worth is never defined by your struggles, but by the courage you show in facing them. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
You had mentioned that you had been an articling student through some of your struggles, and having been a principal for a number of articling students over the years. I have a question, it's a two-part question. One, did your article principal address the issues that you were facing or say anything? And if they didn't, would you have wanted them to?
I didn't disclose my eating disorder to my articling principal at the time. There were very few people who were aware of what was happening in my life. I would have, if I had been in the position I am today, I would have disclosed it to her, and I would have wanted to see what support was available. The problem is they thrive in secrecy, so it's like battling your own mind every day. And I was sitting on I articled at the MAG, so I led some mental health group sessions for MAG, and there was never any talk about eating disorders, just sort of something that is never really discussed. So although I was comfortable sharing my struggles with anxiety and depression, I didn't feel like the legal profession was ready to accept me as a competent lawyer with someone with such a serious mental health illness.
So just to follow up, in retrospect, do you wish that your articling principal would have felt comfortable enough to be able to address with you, not necessarily the specifics of your private struggle, but just generally, because you had said that you were struggling, that you were having a difficult time, concentrating and you were, passing out, and then, these were things that would have been obvious, I would think, within your professional setting. Do you wish the articling principal had addressed it in some manner?
I do think it was obvious in some respects, but I don't think anyone really knows how to approach someone with what they suspect would be an eating disorder. It's often very difficult for anyone to make any difference that doesn't have specialized training in what you're doing. So it's a very difficult thing to if it's your articling student, know that you're aware that they're struggling. I think that would be as far as you should go on a first mention of it, because it's extremely shameful. So I would feel like, oh my goodness, what have I done wrong not to hide it better? And maybe I would brush it off as, no, I just didn't eat enough today, that sort of thing. So it's very hard because your loved ones have to watch you, or as an articling principal, you'd have to watch someone and know that even mentioning it could make it worse for the person who's actually dealing with it.
So more of a general follow-up, we're here if you need us or if there's a problem.
Yeah, I think that would be the best way to approach it. It's a tough thing to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I think Bill was faster than me.
So this is an area that's very interesting to me and something I've been looking into, wellness and the rest of it. And I have a question about stigma. So obviously a book like this is amazing because one of the ways to break down stigma is to share stories. So I kind of have a two-part question. I think a lot of people, before they say anything, are very worried about how they'll be received. And yet, when I talk to people who have communicated these kind of messages, they're not received poorly. In fact, they're received well. So in your experiences, when you did talk about your situation, was it received well, or did you feel that stigma? And then secondly, for the rest of us in firms, are you seeing any things that we can do in firms, practical things that can help break down the stigma or avoid it?
What was the second part of your question? Could you just, for firms?
Well, we're looking, like, if you, obviously sharing stories like you've done is a practical thing that we can do to break down stigma, because if people are willing to talk, that's a good step. I'm just wondering if you can think of any other things that you're seeing or you've heard about that helps to break down the stigma in terms of what we're doing in our firms. Like, I know one of you mentioned mental health first aid training. Is there anything else?
Maybe I'll just start here. I think in terms of breaking down the stigma and allowing people to show vulnerability and to talk about anxiety or stress or mental wellness, I think it starts by especially I think, if you're a principal or you're the leader of a firm, whatnot, making space in the week or the day or some point to say, hey, how's everyone feeling about X or Y or Z? I find it's like crazy or something like that. I mean, I give you an example, just as one example. Justice Band, judge at the Ontario Court of Justice, I think it was in the middle, he was doing a child pornography case, and it was like after a really heavy, kind of day in court, he said, you know what, we're gonna all take a break. And he kind of like checked in with people. He checked in with his court staff, and he made it permissible to talk about the stress that came along with doing that kind of file. And so I think that there could be opportunities like that, or even in other circumstances, like talking about articling. When I articled for a very busy criminal trial and appellate firm, I was pulling my hair out. I was working like 80 hours a week. I remember calling the Law Society and saying, is this allowed? I mean, and then it was like, oh yeah, the ESA doesn't apply to articling. Or is it really? That's crazy. Okay, well, I'm stuck, right? But nobody addressed it. And as a result, these kinds of things didn't air. Like as soon as I think what your question is, as soon as you raise the topic, people are like, oh, good, you're not the only one. I feel that way too. And then it just becomes like an opening up, a letting go of the stress that builds up, and that permission, I think is healing in itself. It's a form of mindfulness exercise. Part of mindfulness is letting go of the stress. Like opening up the top of the boiling pot and letting some steam out. So I don't know. In a sense, I'm trying to answer both of the questions at the same time. But that kind of springs to mind.
If I could jump in for part two, what I've realized is often persons in managerial positions, or if you're an articling principal, they might not be the best suited person for someone to talk to about their mental health issues. And I've been sort of floating around the idea of having someone trained in a firm who is very personable, who is easy to approach, who's trained in not helping the person go through their mental illness, but having a compassionate ear and approaching it with empathy and being the lead to direct them towards those resources. So having almost like a mental health officer or someone who is the go-to. And then also having a backup, because again, not everyone gets along with everyone. But I think having someone who's spoken openly about their mental health issues would probably be a great place to start, but then also recognizing that certain managers are not the right person to approach, sort of thing.
Thanks again for your presentation and for being so real and raw with us about your experiences. Really appreciate that. I had an opportunity to read this book before it was published and provide a testimonial for it, sort of on behalf of FOLA. And what I want to commend everyone about it is that what's really real about it is it provides really personal experience from people at various ages and stages of practice and types of practice area and all kinds of diversity from the professional community, because as much as we appreciate so much the validation of this subject matter when it comes from on high, like, oh, a judge has written about mental health, like, great. But you know, there's a lot of safety around that person to say those things that doesn't exist for everybody else. And so what I want to commend you for about this is that I think that you empower others to have those normalized conversations when we see people in different parts of the legal community, different parts of the justice sector participating in the dialogue in an open way. So thank you.
Thank you.
I was called to the bar in 2000. Courtney, you were called to the bar in
2021.
Yeah, so that exactly, like the book is like a wide, and I am so blown away by Courtney and people who talked about their experiences. Like I took a break from the law and then I came back, I'm blown away by some of those stories. And if you've attended any of the mental wellness seminars, or I think, what do they call them, in May, the one that you did?
The Law Society Mental Health Summit.
Yeah, the summits. It's the stories you can hear are really raw and really true and really helpful, really amazing.
Thanks again.